Hi, Helen from crystalsandcrochet.com here. In this video tutorial I would like to show you how I work with a puff stitch. Okay, so these samples are all made in Aran weight yarn with a 5mm hook. This is a normal puff stitch, and then we've got a chunky puff stitch and a super chunky puff stitch. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to make all three of these, although essentially they're all the same. So once you've got the hang of it, it's really easy to just go up in size. Okay, with the puff stitch it's fairly reversible, but the puff stitches are all worked on the right side of the work. Okay, so you're going to start off with a foundation row of single crochet, and then you will work the in-between rows on the wrong side and the puff stitch rows on the right side. That's obviously when you're working in rows. When you're working in the round, where you make your puff stitch, etc., all of those details will be in the instructions for the pattern that you're using. But this is just so that you can make squares or scarves or whatever shape you want to make, okay? Working in rows. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to show you how to do each of these, but we're going to start off with the normal puff stitch, okay? And the normal puff stitch is worked on a foundation of multiples of 2 plus 1. Okay, so when you do that first chain, you're going to do a multiple of 2 plus 2, and then one of those extra 2 becomes your turning chain to lift you up, but you will have a multiple of 2 in your stitches plus 1. Okay, so I've just done the first row here. So as we're going to turn and carry on, this is going to be the right side of our work. Okay, we're going to turn now, so I'm going to chain 1 and turn, so we're now on the wrong side. For the normal puff stitch, we are going to single crochet into that very first stitch, chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet. Okay, and you're just going to work all the way across like that, and that will be your in-between row, if you like. For every row that you do in between your puff stitches, it's just single crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet, chain 1, and a single crochet into that very last stitch. Okay, now we're going to chain 1 and turn. So we're back onto the right side of our work again now, and we're going to make a half double crochet in that very first stitch. Okay, our puff stitches will be made into these chain spaces. Okay, so to make your puff stitch, yarn over. I tend to use my finger. Depends whether, you know, if you're a knife hold you might use your first finger. If you're like me, a pencil hold, then you might want to use your second finger just to hold the yarn in place on the hook, because you're going to get a lot of loops on this hook in a minute. Okay, so yarn over into the chain 1 space, yarn over, pull up a loop and lift it up to the height of your half double crochet. Okay, that's once, and we're going to do that 4 times. Okay, so 1, 2, yarn over again, and 3, yarn over again, and 4. Okay, and make sure that your hook moves nice and loosely through those loops so that you're going to be able to yarn over and pull through all of them nicely. Okay, so for our normal puff stitch, we've got our working loop, plus we've done a yarn over and pulled up a loop 4 times. Okay, so each one gives us 2 loops, so we've got 9 loops altogether on our hook. Okay, so we're going to yarn over and pull through all of those loops and chain 1, and that is our puff stitch formed. Okay, the chain 1 just closes it, brings it all together. Okay, and repeat exactly the same thing. Skip the single crochets in between and just make a puff stitch into each of the chain 1 spaces. So yarn over, pull up a loop, pull it up to the height of your other stitches, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, and pull up. Okay, so we've done that 4 times, 9 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all of those loops and chain 1. Okay, and again yarn over into our chain 1 space, pull up a loop, and then 3 more times, so 4 times in total, yarn over, pull up a loop, that's 2, yarn over, pull up a loop, that's 3, yarn over, pull up a loop, that's 4. Yarn over, pull through all of the loops on your hook, chain 1. Okay, I'll catch up with you when I get to the end. Okay, so I've come all the way along, I've made my last puff stitch and my last chain 1 space, used the chain 1 to close it at the top, and now half double crochet into that last stitch. Okay, chain 1 and turn, single crochet into that very first stitch, chain 1, skip the chain 1 that you've made above the puff stitch to close it, and go into the actual puff stitch, which is the bit that sits to the side here, the single crochet. Okay, so skip the chain 1, single crochet into the puff stitch. Okay, exactly the same as we did for that very first row where it was just single crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch. Okay, so just carry on working exactly the same way into the puff stitch, and don't forget that very last stitch. Okay, so you're going to have 2 single crochets right together there at the end. Okay, so I've just worked another row, so now I'm going to show you how to finish off. So this would be your final row. Okay, so again we're going to chain 1 and turn, and then single crochet into that very first stitch, and then you're going to single crochet into the chain 1 on top of your puff stitch, into the puff stitch. Okay, so it's really easy. Just single crochet into each chain 1 and each puff stitch. just carry on and work all the way across, and that finishes. But don't forget, that's the reverse side, so when we're actually done and we turn our work over, there is our finished piece with the normal puff stitch. Okay, so now let's move on to the chunky puff stitch. Exactly the same single crochets on our bottom row, our foundation row, but this time you need to make sure that you've got a multiple of 3 plus 2, 1 for your turning chain and 1 for the extra single crochet at the end. So you've got multiples of 3 plus 1 single crochet. Okay, so we're going to chain 1 and turn exactly the same as we did before, and single crochet into that very first stitch. But now we're going to chain 2, skip 2 stitches, single crochet into the third. Okay, chain 2, skip 2 stitches, single crochet into the third. And just carry on working like that, 1, 2, 3, all the way across. 1, 2, and into that very last one there. Chain 1, turn, half double crochet into that very first stitch. Now we've got chain 2 spaces that we're going to work into, and for our normal puff stitch we yarn over and pull up a loop 4 times. Okay, for the chunky puff stitch we're going to do it 7 times. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Okay, so we have got loads of loops on our hook there. There should be 15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There we go. Okay, so 2 for every yarn over and pull up a loop, plus our working loop. Again, make sure that you're not too tight and you've got a nice movement through there, so that you can yarn over and pull through all of those loops and chain 1 to close your puff stitch. And again, don't strangle it, don't do that really tight and strangle it. Keep a little bit of movement in that top bit. Okay, so then we are going to chain 1 more. Okay, because don't forget we've got 2 stitches skipped here, so the chain to close is our first one, and there's our second chain, and then we're going to go in and make our puff stitch again. Okay, so remember this time we are going to go 7 times, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Pull through, chain to close, make an extra chain. Okay, so carry on like that across, and then exactly the same as before, when you come up to do that middle row, or the in-between row. I'll show you just to make sure, working across there. Okay, so I've come all the way across, not forgetting that last half double crochet in that last stitch. Chain one and turn. Okay, now again you can clearly see here's our puff stitch. I'll bring that right up, you can see here's our puff stitch and our chain one above our puff stitch plus our other chain one. Okay, if I show you here again, you can see got the extra chain one in between puff stitch and 2 chain ones. So if we're going to finish off, you need to make sure that you're making 3 stitches, 1 in that extra chain one space, 1 in the chain one directly above the puff stitch, and 1 into the puff stitch itself. Okay, if we're going to carry on, we're going to chain 1 and half double crochet into that very first stitch, chain 2, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, single crochet into that first stitch, chain 2, and then single crochet into the puff stitch. Okay, so there's our next space directly above this puff stitch. Okay, so carry on all the way across, chain 2, skip the 2 chains, single crochet in the puff stitch, into the puff stitch, 1, 2, into the puff stitch, and not forgetting that very last single crochet into the end. So again we've got 2 together, chain 1, turn, half double crochet into that first stitch, skip the next stitch, and then your next puff stitch is going to go in here. So for your chunky puff stitch, you're going to yarn over and pull up a loop 7 times, so you'll have 15 loops on your hook altogether. Okay, so again, don't forget with the chunky, you're doing an extra chain 1 in between. So chain 1 to close, an extra chain 1, and then a half double crochet into that very last stitch on the end. Chain 1 and turn. So to finish off, we're going to single crochet into that very first stitch, into the second chain space, into the chain space above our puff stitch, and into the puff stitch itself. So this time there's 3 stitches to each part. Okay, the second chain space, the first chain that closes the puff stitch, and into the puff stitch itself. And just finish that off. And then of course 1 into that very last stitch. Let's snip that off. Okay, so again, there we go. So the difference is obviously your puff stitch becomes much wider. And now on to the super chunky. Okay, so for our super chunky puff stitch, the foundation chain at the bottom is going to be multiples of 4 this time. Okay, so 4 plus the 2, 1 being that lift up, and then we have an extra stitch. So if you are working across, you're going to have 4 plus 1. Okay, so then I've just chained 1, turned and single crocheted in that first stitch, exactly the same as with all of the others. This time we're just going up 1 more, so 3 chains. Okay, skip 3 stitches, single crochet into the 4th, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, into the 4th. Okay, 1, 2, 3, skip 3 stitches and into the 4th, which for me is my last stitch, if I can get my hook into both of those loops. There we go. Okay, chain 1, turn, half double crochet into that first stitch. Okay, so it's exactly the same principle, it's just each time we're increasing the number of chains in the space, the number of stitches that we're skipping. Okay, and of course the other thing that we're increasing is the number of times we yarn over and pull up a loop. Okay, so for normal it's yarn over, pull up a loop 4 times. For chunky it's yarn over, pull up a loop 7 times. 10 times for this one. Okay, so it does take a little bit of control with your fingers and keeping everything up on your hook, because you are going to have 21 loops on your hook. Okay, so yarn over and pull up a loop in exactly the same way, but we are going to do this 10 times. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, move it all along a bit, 9 and 10. Okay, now again, because you've got quite a big chain space here, it's very tempting to actually lift that chain right up and go too tight in here. So again, make sure that your hook moves really easily through all of those stitches. Yarn over and pull through all of those stitches, and again don't close that chain too tight. You now need to chain an extra 2. Okay, so we've got the chain that closes plus 2, which gives us the 3 in between here. Okay, so again, yarn over, pull up a loop, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, scoot it all along a bit, 8, 9 and 10. Yarn over, pull through all of those loops, and then chain 1, 2, 3. Okay, Okay, so all the way along to the end, not forgetting to do that last half double crochet in the very last stitch there at the end. Then again, chain 1, turn, single crochet into that first stitch, 1, 2, 3, and then single crochet into your puff stitch. Okay, so that you're skipping those 3 chains. And again, work along, you'll finish with 2 single crochets at this end, and then you're going to just chain 1, turn, half double crochet, and then work your puff stitches for the next row into your chain 3 space. And I'll catch up with you once I come back again. Okay, so I've come all the way along to the end, chain 1 and turn, and now to finish off we're going to single crochet into that first half double crochet, and we've now got 3 chains and our puff stitch. So we're going to do 2 single crochets into that 2 chain space, 1 into the chain to close the puff, and 1 into the puff. Okay, so remember we were a multiple of 4. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then not forgetting that very last stitch at the end. Okay, so that is our super chunky puff stitch. Okay, a little bit more open in between, but a really gorgeously textured puffy stitch. Okay, if you don't want it quite as open, you could actually do a row of single crochet or a couple of rows of single crochet in between, or instead of one of the chain spaces you can actually make a half double crochet down into those single crochets that we've been skipping as we've been going along. Okay, but that's the super chunky, the chunky and the normal puff stitch. Okay, thanks for watching.